Hello, and thank you once again for joining me on one of my worm videos. I currently have 5 composting systems going in my indoor area. The first two are regular totes, which don't have any holes at the bottom, and I don't leave the lids on them. Last week, I had a real big issue with the regular totes. Really, I had a real big issue with all of my totes in that they had a ton of water that was held in them. And I do believe that came from adding the shredded cardboard in just one area. So what I did last week was spread the cardboard all throughout the bin, and these bins have recovered pretty nicely. They're still kind of damp, but there's not as much water being held in them as what I was looking at last week. And when I look at this particular bin, it does look like the worms did go ahead and break down quite a bit of the shredded cardboard that I put in there. There's not a lot hanging out in the top or all over. So I am going to do yet another week where I give the bin a smaller feeding and I avoid adding a lot of food to this as I do want them to break it down. Again, the castings themselves feel great. Much more improvement over last week's castings, how they felt really damp. But still, they have quite a bit of wetness in them. I am still trying to decide though how I'm going to do the harvesting. I think I'm going to try to do the migration on all of these, but I'm just making my decision as it gets closer. But I think I only have about 1 or 2 more weeks before this one is headed into the harvest. But I did give it a smaller feeding, and I decided just to put the bubble wrap in the area where the food was to allow some of the moisture to evaporate a little bit more. And then once I finished up with that, this bin was set up for the next week. Moving over to the second of the regular totes. With this one, I already put the bubble wrap only on one half of the bin instead of the whole bin to encourage it to dry out, because this is the one that has been a lot wetter than the other bin all season long. So I wanted to see if that worked for this bin as well. And the top of it definitely dried out quite a bit, but there's still a lot more cardboard in this bin than in the other bin. So this one I'm going to mix up a lot more than the other one. And I can't truly get rid of the bubble wrap as the worms do crawl in and out, and I see a lot of cocoons in various color stages all throughout the bubble wrap. So I'm just checking it here, seeing what I see, and I do see some juvenile worms as well. So at least I know in these bins they're happy, they're multiplying, and they're getting all through the material. As I did mention previously, if there is still a lot of shredded cardboard left, I do not have a problem still going through the harvest if the material is dry, as I'll just throw it right back into the bins and reuse it. I don't dump it out at all. But just the feel of the castings in comparison to how wet they were last week, it is a overall market improvement in the level of moisture in here. So the focus is the same on this one. Give it a small feeding to encourage the worms to get in there and break down the shredded cardboard that's in here, and then close it up and let it go for another week. Just like with the other bin, before I close it up, I'm only going to put the bubble wrap on part of it. I'm hesitant to completely take the lid off because in previous times when I completely take the mosquito screen or any type of covering off of the bin, then the bin dries out too quickly. So I am still going to leave this piece here, and then that completes the update for this bin for this week. Next bin is my first of the 2 Vermibag minis, and this is the one that is on schedule to be harvested right along with the regular totes. This bin, I was trying to show some of the cocoons that were on the bubble wrap, but it just doesn't pick up on the camera. but there were a bunch of cocoons in the more amber stage and some juvenile worms hanging out on the bubble wrap, which again, I'm so excited to see. Unfortunately, it's not in the bin that I am trying to multiply. So I'm hopeful that the worms are doing what they need to do in all of the bins, but this one just had some worms on the bubble wrap that were clearly present. Now for this Vermi bag tote, it was still a lot wetter than what my usual Vermi bag tote systems run. And again, I don't know what is accounting for that in this bin because the cardboard was mixed through, but it doesn't seem to have made as big of an impact in these systems as it did for the regular totes where they dried out pretty quickly. I'm going to probably remove this from the current tote once this gets harvested, so I might have to do a bait process on this one. One, because the tape, which is in the left corner, the tape is peeling from the side. I did have to repair this. And two, I just want to make sure that it is positioned correctly because again, the Vermi bag totes tend to run drier. They will be the driest systems because of the material. But despite that, the system is still doing well. The worm colony looks pretty good. So this will get the smaller size feeding and set up for the harvest in about a week or two, just like the other regular bins. Moving over to my last tote system, this Vermi bag tote is not on the same harvesting schedule as the other totes. I'm really taking a good look at the bubble wrap here, and I do see some juveniles, which is actually very exciting to see as it lets me know the worms are getting in here and doing what they're supposed to do. But I didn't see any worms up on the newspaper. It did feel a little dry, so when I add some water to this, I'm just going to be adding it onto the newspaper. The area where I have been feeding is obviously where the worms have been collecting. So the week that I decide it's time to harvest, I'm going to mix all the material together. I really am hesitating moving around this shredded cardboard too much just in case there are cocoons in there. I don't want to damage them. I'm just checking it for the moisture content because the cardboard for me tends to dry out quickly. So I'm just going to give it a smaller feeding, not because I'm trying to take it to harvest, but because there's not as many worms. So I do not want to overfeed this bag and encourage any beetle population to break out. I would be concerned that if the beetles multiplied in the bin, that they would take over and harm my worm colony. So I am cautious of how much food I put into this particular bin. But after I've fed it up and I've added water to the side with just the cardboard, that will complete the update for this particular bin. And I'm very hopeful that I can encourage growth in this bin as the weeks go on. The final bin is my Vermi Bag Mini, which this system has a very large amount of pros for using, but the one con again comes to the harvest, which is why I try not to harvest this bin a lot. But it is my only flow through system, which means you can feed it a good portion of food and you never really have to worry about overfeeding this particular bin or putting too much moisture into it. Now the previous week I gave it smaller feedings of cucumbers and watermelon to add to the moisture because unlike my other 5 bins, this bin is really suffering from dryness around the edges. So this bin I treat a little bit differently. Even though I'm going to put watermelon in this, I am bringing up the content of the material in this bin. So I will be adding some more shredded cardboard. As such, I'm going to water this bin down after giving it the feeding because I concentrated the food in the middle and the edges are where they get crispy. So after giving it a smaller than usual feeding in this bin, I acknowledge that because I did put 2 medium-sized feedings back to back. I am going to add some cardboard and give this a good wetting with my watering can to make sure that the edges don't dry out too much. This bin will also be harvested right along with the other totes. I haven't harvested it in quite some time, and I'm interested to see if the castings towards the bottom are mushy from those weeks that I really did give it larger feedings during the summer, and whether the humidity affected the castings at all. But that does complete the update for this week. Thank you so much for sticking to the end. If you like the content, please subscribe and hit that like button. And thank you so much for watching.